So I think one of the things that we often struggle with is the mere fact that we all have our own karmic conditions. We experience and view the world differently. In some ways, it can be very hard, particularly through language, of being able to convey it. Regardless of our conditions, we can change our relationship to it. And that's really ultimately a great test to both honor this karma, at the same time not to let it dictate our lives. Thank you to you all. Thank you, Shinge Roshi, Chigan Roshi, Hokuto Osho, all those here, all of us, part of Zen studies of this practice of just simply being. It's really a privilege to have this be a part of my personal path, and it's wonderful to share it with all of you. Well, I think I'll just preface some things with saying that I've actually been giving some talks with a relative frequency in Wisconsin. At Shinge Roshi's retirement, obviously you can see how much relaxation she's getting. She relieved herself of some of her duties for a Zen Studies Society, but she certainly has not turned her back on the Sangha nor the Dharma, and continues in this fervent effort, in this great determination to help share this treasure, to help us all awaken. And at that retirement, I spoke. She had requested that I provide some words. And at that talk, at the event, there was Vikara Roshi, who some may know through the Hollow Bone Sangha. She was the wife of Junpo Roshi, who is also one of Edo Roshi's Dharma heirs. And after hearing me, I encountered her and she asked me to give a talk. So she invited me to go up there. I'm based in the Milwaukee area, so it's an hour and a half or so. And that was back in, I guess that would have been November of 23. So I went and offered that talk, and then was requested that if I would like to, I could come back on a regular basis. So I started to do that this past January, I guess, of 2024. And it's wild to think that that's been now about a year and a half. But what makes me think of it is I found that at various points when I sit down, it's like, well, we'll just see what happens. What this will be was not really for me to know. I have some notes, they'll hopefully make some sense, but ultimately there's been that gift in having those opportunities when you really just step aside, just see what happens, to trust, to have faith. And it doesn't have to be anything spectacular. It only has to be something that really connects with the moment, with the people present, to encourage them and support them in their own efforts of waking up, their own efforts of being able to shed some of their own suffering, to help others in doing the same. So to kick things off, I'll turn to one of my favorite books, Novice to Master, An Ongoing Lesson in the Extent of My Own Stupidity. This is Soko Morinaga Roshi. It really is a great gift, and I found myself wondering, I just had to look it up. Yeah, he passed 30 years ago this month. It was June 12th of 95. He's really a wonderful teacher, and I think I also like to acknowledge that it's translated by Belenda Adaway Yamakawa. I think that's often overlooked of all the people who are part of making these things possible, and is so often the case. There's a woman, a student, and somebody who had in their own depth and understanding and intimacy with their own teacher is able to help provide a way for us to connect through a different language, to really see both the teaching and the teacher themselves. And it's really a wonderful thing to have somebody that has that ability to help bring to life, at least in a sense of language, to another culture, the teachings of their own teacher. I think the first time I really encountered this, and it really took me, I found it very moving, very powerful. I had the fortune back in 2007 to see the Dalai Lama. He was in Ithaca. And I saw the public talk, and it was a wonderful talk. And a very different focus from having the privilege to see one of his teachings. It was the 7 points, 8 points, I forget which one. There are different collections, but the 8 points of mind training. And there he spoke in Tibetan, and he had a translator. And it was an incredibly powerful teaching. But one of the things I really was moved by was the ability of this translator to present it. Ultimately, they have to be able to convert in language the unconvertible, like something that can't be presented, and to do so through their own depth of understanding. It was really a remarkable thing, and has left quite an impression on me over time. It was a very, one of the various catalysts in my life at that time. So, returning to Sokomura Nagaroshi, this is in a chapter titled, Getting to Know My Own Idiocy. I've heard it said in critical observation of falling in love and getting married, that marriage is moving from beautiful misunderstanding into tragic understanding. This phrase sums up certain stages in the process of Zen practice as well. Again, I say that it would not be an exaggeration to characterize my own life up to now as simply a succession of realizations of my own misunderstanding that was not even beautiful, and a process of getting to know my own idiocy. For a person strong in his cravings, clinging to his narrow experience, and knowledge as the supreme law, caught in a ravine between feelings of superiority and inferiority, between building and destroying an ideal self, to uncover one's own misconceptions is a task much more easily described than accomplished. How true is that? I have the privilege to get up here and talk about it. The challenge being, how do you really come from it, through it, to be it? And of course, there is that element of being really honest about it. Perhaps this is the time. For years, I found myself thinking, well, if I ever did a little collections of reflections or musings, I'd like to title it Rambling Meanderings of a Bumbling Fool. And today came to mind a little continuation of that title, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Dharma. Yeah, this is, I've actually have said at various points, to people that I know, especially when I was a resident here, it's a very common thing to find yourself in a position of, it's very difficult. You're not just challenged by the schedule, but then various painful, emotional, psychological things tend to emerge. And it can be very, very, very challenging. How do you face that? And at the same time, how do you have the feeling that you even want to turn to see other people? You don't necessarily want to see them because you don't want to be seen. But through my own experience of those challenges, found that this is a great place to fall apart. And that's one of the things that I've usually have shared with them through that experience. Yeah, it was something that I wouldn't have chosen, but at the same time, I would never get rid of that. To be so profoundly grateful for that challenge. more so, of my thing of the saying this is a great place to fall apart, is that you have an environment and a community that can facilitate that. They can offer the space, yes, to support you, but at the same time, just to simply let you fall apart. They don't have to fix it. They don't have to do anything for you, but be present. So what brought this to mind is that sense of, well, what a great place to look the fool. This is also a great place we can simply make mistakes. Of course, we make mistakes all the time. We don't want people to see them. But here we have that opportunity and that fact of really delving in to have things that just are awkward, weird, and maybe embarrassing to come forth. And that's okay. And in some ways it's essential. They just become things that are otherwise withheld, repressed. And even if ultimately they're something not of that great significance, just simply the ability to have the space to release them offers so much opportunity, if nothing else, to know that you don't have to hold on. The real struggle is the fact that you're trying to hold it. Ultimately, there's nothing to hold, but there's this conception, this idea, this view of our experience of ourselves, our sense of what other people will think. And that's where some of the real energy comes in, that sense of what other people will think. As a lot of energy is invested into simply protecting ourselves, guarding that. But for what? Honestly, I'm somebody, I don't enjoy making mistakes. And yet, in some ways that is the greatest folly of it all. To think that you won't, that you can't, that you shouldn't. How else can we learn? There's a lot of life that is simply through experience. That's all of life. If we're not experiencing, what are we doing? But it's through those experiences that we can really get a better sense of really how to function. So along those lines, Morinagi Roshi continues. Most people create sharp distinctions between good and bad, not realizing that these distinctions are meaningless artificialities. They labor under the mistaken view that practice consists of throwing out the bad and searching for the good. In so doing, they misplace their efforts and waste their energy. Holding their ideals dear, trying to become the ideal selves they picture in their minds, they fail to see the value of what is already within them. Indeed, it is not easy to take a collection of such people and lead them to awaken to the dignity that is the very root of humanity. Yes, all those value judgments, the good and bad, right and wrong, shoulds and shouldn'ts. All the things that really simply distract us from what is present. I've found myself saying in general, usually in a social political context, that there's so many things that are smoke screens. But we're operating our own internal smoke screens all the time. And we like to, blow those around on others as well. Why not share them? If I'm confused, why not join me? It's most often that the real opportunities arise from seeing where that confusion arises. Getting to the roots of it. That's a hard thing to do, particularly in circumstances in which there's, at least in the present, the inability to really meet to offer that space and that clinging, grasping, that exertion of energy into all of our views. It is ultimately very exhausting. I mean, if you just see people when they're engaged in it, perhaps if you see yourself engaged in it, it is something that, I mean, you can just feel the energy of it. There's a certain way in which it really comes forth that, like, the very conceptions themselves, you can feel it almost dam up in energy just within you. And sometimes that just brings about those, outlashing, to lash out at people, to lash at yourself, whatever it might be. Just some way in which you feel you can otherwise dispel that energy, but not realizing that the real trick is not necessarily having to engage to hold on to that energy. You don't have to hold on to these views. You don't have to have that, negative energy. In some ways, you don't even know how would I say? You don't have to hold on to the positive either. There are wonderful things in which they can really help convey or help people connect with, or even for yourself at times to recall something can be a great inlet into saying, okay, there's that feeling you can reconnect with. You don't even have to hold on to it. It's simply available if you allow yourself to really rediscover it, to have it emerge anew. But it's so easy to find oneself falling back into all those judgments and views, all the ways that we partition things, trying to find some sense of control and security in something that's forever unstable. It's always changing. If there's any real stability, is the fact that change is inevitable. So I think one of the things that we often struggle with is the mere fact that we all have our own karmic conditions. We experience and view the world differently. In some ways, it can be very hard, particularly through language, of being able to convey it. Of course, we partly have the difficulty at times people relate to words differently. Sometimes you find in a conversation, you basically have to say, okay, this is what I'm meaning, or this is what I intend. To have somebody be like, oh, okay. At least there's not an obstacle just solely through, a single word. But yeah, it's just so natural. Of course we're all different. So I wanted to read a little thing from The Path to Bodhidharma, the teachings of Shoda Harada Roshi. Again, the translator is Priscilla Daichi Storant. And it really is a wonderful book if you haven't read it. Unfortunately, it's out of print, but if you can ever find one, it's an excellent book. And I'll be looking at a portion of the Bodhidharma's outline of practice. We're all different in our physical characteristics, possessions, intelligence, and personality. Why are we all so different? All children spend a long time wondering about this one. Bodhidharma teaches that of course we are different. Our parents are all different, our parents' personalities are all different, and their parents' personalities as well. We are not like little rolls of croissants being made exactly alike at the bakery each day. We have our father's personality and also the karma of being born from him. We have our mother's personality and also the karma of being born from her. Why does the person next to me come from such a rich family? No matter how much I worry about it, it will not make any difference. All of our differences come from karmic connections reaching back long before our own birth. Originally, our source is without stain, empty of egoistic self. But why then, we wonder, do we suffer so? There are even some who suffer all the time. They live in the midst of constant suffering, unable to do anything about it, while other people are living in happiness and comfort. Everything comes from karmic connections, and everything will eventually change when the karmic effects that brought it about wear off. I found myself really looking into this, well, in a sense, what is karma? But of course, in its simplest form, we can say karma is cause and effect. And that's true. And as he's saying, simply by the virtue of what family we're born into, our parents, their parents, and so on and so forth. There's this karmic continuum that's shared through that. But in that karmic continuum, there's even things of where we're born. There's things of the weather you experience. He's saying, people who are suffering all the time, sometimes it's simply a matter of where they live. Mind you, at this time, there's things that we do as a collective that bring about some of those conditions. Both in weather and certainly in socio-political climate. And what are they to do? They don't necessarily have control over that. They're not necessarily in a position where they can change it. Yet regardless of our conditions, we can change our relationship to it. And that's really ultimately a great test to both honor this karma, at the same time not to let it dictate our lives. And there's that thing he's saying about them wearing off. This can happen simply through the mere fact of they're exhausted and through the intentionality that we bring to meeting them. If we no longer feed those seeds, they no longer perpetuate. Of course, this too can be that trap, but I'll likely return to that later. So as I was saying earlier, that everything is constant change. So returning to Soko Morinaga Roshi, everything that appears in this world constantly changes. It undergoes a period of maturing, a period of maintenance, and a return to emptiness, birth, aging, and death. Through no effort can you skirt the process of growing old. There's no endeavor whatsoever that will get you beyond death. Whatever is accumulated will be lost. Whatever is born will die. Whatever is built will be destroyed. A view of the essence of life is a view that helps us through our suffering, as we must face it. These are really those fundamental experiences, partly the mere matter of living, being alive, to be born, to age, whatever duration that might be, and to die. This is what really propelled Shakyamuni Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, to seek the Dharma, not knowing what he was seeking, and yet knowing there was something that could be known, that could be experienced, that he just wasn't able to encounter under his present conditions. And I won't go into the story, but it was really those, that sickness, old age, and death, that really sparked this pursuit sparked this great vow. And through that encounter, here we sit. It's not that we would have the inability to discover what he taught without him having taught. And yet, there is really nothing that he can teach. His teachings are in accord with the Dharma, but they're not Dharma itself. It's something we can only know for ourselves. It doesn't require a living Buddha to realize our own Buddhahood, our own true nature. But there's a real power, so you would also talk about the three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So of course, Buddha is in part his teacher, but also this true nature of which we all possess. This Dharma, this indestructible Dharma, and the Sangha, all of those that support one another in this effort, and all those that unknowingly are supporting us through it as well. Both those that preceded us and all of those that provide the various things that support our lives, the ability to live, to have food and shelter. And as he was saying, they're really essential to look at birth, aging, and death, as there's no escaping. If you are born, you'll die. And there's no separation. And when we really look at them, when we engage in them, they force us to look beyond, to set down all the things that distract us from this reality. As I was saying before, there's so many smoke screens, and so much stimuli these days. It's a great thing to be able to come here. There's plenty of things to still stimulate our activity of mind, but it's a great thing to not have a constant barrage of stimulus. Well, I'm certainly a person with many opinions. If you've talked to me, you perhaps have encountered a few. But one of the things that I find a bit annoying, so these days I can't help but find that there's so many gas stations. We using something that obviously burning these fossil fuels, but in the meantime, you start to pump and they have to play some sort of advertisements. There's the music on as well. There's just so many things that even in that moment, you can't even have the opportunity to really reflect per se. Of course, all of it we can reflect upon, but in that moment, there's this constant stimulus. And as you pump your gas, knowing that ultimately that there are consequences of that action, you then are being told there's other things you're lacking. There's other things you need. So to come here and have this opportunity to simply sit down, to experience our lives, just experience just whatever is arising, whatever feelings we haven't been able to necessarily even acknowledge, or even if we've felt them, we haven't had the opportunity to truly experience them. So there's a little editorial comment. I had said before of having my opinions. I certainly have them. And there's a text, Faith in Mind, Sosan Kanchi Zenji or Ganchi Zenji, that I have this very strong karmic, dharmic connection to. And there's a line in there where he says, just cease cherishing opinions. And in the moment of saying it, there's that part of me that's like, just don't cherish them, you can have them. But there's a certain way of which, of course, they'll arise. They will arise. Just don't cherish them. To know that there might be something in what you see that can be useful, can aid, and yet to know that it's ultimately incomplete. That in this, if we really are going to do things together, to know that we all in some ways have a partial picture. And so opinions aren't inherently bad. It's simply our over-investment in them that ultimately is the greatest obstacle to really being able to come together. Of course, ultimately, all forms of our confusion, our misunderstandings, this is the true obstacle. The true obstacle from really seeing that is truly the reality. We are not separated. We are all here together. And it was said at the opening remarks, this Sesshin, this unifying mind, unifying heart-mind, both the divisions that come about within ourselves, but those that are between us, those impediments that we insert between ourselves and all those that we share this life with. So, returning to Moronagaroshi, there's a chapter, A Heart That Does Not Move. So he's recounting at some point meeting a practitioner at a talk that he was giving, who had been sitting for 6 or 7 years, and en route to the talk was on the subway, and somebody stepped on his foot, and they didn't even acknowledge it. And he had this idea that there was ways he shouldn't respond, he shouldn't react. And so he says, that person didn't even bother to say, excuse me, or I'm sorry, but just went on as if nothing had happened. I tried hard to restrain myself, to keep my heart still, but I just couldn't help getting peeved. Please show me just how to do Zazen, so that I can find the heart that does not move. I answered him, you've already got a heart that does not move. Despite the fact that quite some time has elapsed since you had your foot stepped on, from then until now, your heart has not moved to step away from the place where you got angry. If you think that a still heart is one that does not move regardless of what you encounter, and if that is what you really want, there is no need for you to cultivate it anew. This student continues. Then what is a mind that is truly still? The truly still mind with which you were born is the mind that moves freely, without ignoring anything. It responds wholeheartedly to everything it encounters, to everything on which it reflects. And yet, for all that, it is the mind that is never seized by anything, but is always ready to respond on the spot to whatever it encounters next. The mind that is still is the mind that never forfeits its freedom and is able to constantly keep rolling and rolling and rolling. He continues, the mind that neither ignores anything nor attaches to anything is not something that is obtained through training. It is the natural power with which you entered this world. that nothing's special. We're all bestowed with this at birth. It's not something that sets any one of us apart. As I was saying before, it's the very thing that unifies us. And there can be so many ways through our deluded thinking, our longing for security, ultimately our insecurities, all these various things, and craving aversion from the various things that we experience, the things that we either wish would continue or the things we wish we could simply do away with, that keep propelling that notion, those ways in which we rank, divide, all the various ways in which we try to say something's good or bad, better or less. And ultimately for what? I don't know about you, but I haven't really found any of these things ultimately make me feel better. There may be things that I can do or experience that at least temporarily, it can be beneficial. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging of, the elements, the reality of good and bad karma from a very conditional standpoint. It's something that we can help cultivate the conditions that support us in really being able to encounter this truth, to support each other in discovering this. But just as Shodo Harada Roshi was reminding us of Bodhidharma's teaching, but they exhaust themselves. At some point, those karmic lines come to an end. And this also is quite natural. So I'd like to return to Shodo Harada Roshi and the path to Bodhidharma. And there's a section of questions and answers. And a student who asks, but how does that key and energy of Zen training all of a sudden open into compassion? And he responds, the place where this becomes a problem is in the difference between people who have understood what Kensho is, and I am not saying who have actually experienced it, and those who think that it is some rainbow-colored supernatural experience. People tend to take all of these words, enlightenment, compassion, love, tender heart of sadness, into their brains and conceptualize them. So instead of realizing what it is they are actually feeling, they lay another expression on the situation, thinking that this is what they should be feeling. They think they should be loving. Therefore, they will be loving no matter what they are actually feeling. They may be angry and furious, but they will try to be loving because they know they should be loving. Even if they are not feeling compassionate, they will say, I should be compassionate, so I will try to be compassionate. But unless your love and compassion arise naturally from a clarified state of mind, you are only repressing a state of mind that is the opposite of what you are making yourself feel. Eventually, you are going to suffer the consequences for this. The feelings that are being repressed are merely being camouflaged by those feelings you think you should feel. They will not go away just because it is the popular conception that love, tenderheartedness, and compassion are the emotions to have. That is why this experience of the clear mind is so important. When the clear mind is realized, When these feelings of love and compassion come forth truly, naturally, and spontaneously out of a clear mind, then they are not something that is chosen. Love rather than hate, compassion rather than narrow-mindedness, will evolve naturally from a state of clarity, which brings forth the wisdom to express those things in the moment. With that experience of a clear mind, there will be not be even a thought about whether this is compassion, whether this is love, whether this is tender-heartedness. That clarified mind from which these things come forth naturally must be realized and reached before we can begin expressing those emotions truly. Of course, he's not saying that that's the only way to at least acknowledge, if nothing else, that we don't have to engage in things that are hurtful and harmful. If we know that we're angry, well, we don't have to try to overwrite it. We still have to experience it, but we don't have to be swayed by it, to be controlled by it. Of course, these things will happen. There's those countless eons of karmic conditions that the tendency is to revert to those ways of self-protection, self-affirmation. But ultimately, the only way they can truly manifest, truly be expressed, is through this clarity. Roshi's used the term of, not to get trapped in idiot compassion. Our notions about what should be, how it should be. It's really that need to respond. There's a way it can be very helpful to have the connection with people, to know the subtleties about them, to know what can truly benefit them at that time. But regardless, through clarity, there's things that perhaps you've even found in your own experience. You just say. You don't know from where they arise, but they do. And I can say from my own experience of having been the recipient as well, that sometimes there's that feeling as though they're in your mind. And they're not mind reading. And yet at the same time, there is this mind. We're not apart. We can't restrain, hold back any of these things. They're most readily accessed through our own experience. And at the same time, we can meet. There's another element in which essentially Harada Roshi is saying that they can't be fabricated. You can't construct these things. We take the purity and freedom of this mind and try to create the version we think it should be. What a pointless undertaking. So throughout this, we've heard from Morinaga Roshi and Harada Roshi, of this mind, this clarity of mind. Morinaga Roshi's saying you were born with this. So I wanted to turn to the unborn, the life and teachings of Zen Master Bankei. The real well, in some ways it's expressed solely in the title, the unborn. Throughout his teaching, he brings students' attention to this unborn, the unborn mind. So again, in a Q&A, a monk asked, "I do not know why it is, but my mind often seems to be somewhere else. Could you help me to keep my mind from playing truant like that?" Bankei responds, "The unborn mind of the Buddhas that all people receive from their parents when they were born is wonderfully bright and illuminating. No one, and that includes all of you, is ever separated from it. This absent-mindedness of yours is the same. Your mind's not really somewhere else. It's only that you haven't learned about the Buddha mind. So instead of just dwelling in it, you change it into various other things. Then even though you listen to things, you can't really take them in. You don't really hear them. You're not absent-minded. What you're doing is making the Buddha mind into these other things." Would someone whose mind is really somewhere else be inquiring whether it was or not? If your mind were somewhere else, you would hardly be aware of it. You wouldn't be asking questions about it. You're not even away from it when you sleep. Because if someone calls to you and tells you to wake up, you will respond to him and wake right up. You've never been apart from your mind in the past. You won't be apart from it in the future, and you're not apart from it right now. None of you here has ever been separated from your mind, just as none of you is an unenlightened person. You've each been born with the Buddha mind. It's your birthright. So at least for myself, I've often looked at this, the sense of this true nature, this Buddha nature, this unborn mind. How would I say? In some ways I was saying it before, we all have this. It's nothing that's unique. And yet, as Bankei is saying, that we're born from it. We receive this from our parents. And I find this a very interesting way to experience and relate to it. I imagine perhaps all of you have your own karmic conditions with your parents that can be a little challenging, as often they are with family. I think that's just it seems to be practically universal. There's nothing quite like family that, in part, they know you very well. Sometimes, at the same time, they don't know you that well. If nothing else, that unfortunately on that element of clinging to past, they can't see you as you presently are. But to embrace that. And I can't help but have this feeling of, there's that filial piety. That profound gratitude to one's parents for this life. can be moments in which it's hard to see or feel that, as Arata Roshi's saying, without that clarity of mind. But when it comes forth, it's almost a wonder that you can fall back into all those karmic traps, all those things that obscure your view. Because it just feels so inherent, so natural. So, in returning back, I started this off and talking about being in Wisconsin. I was born in Wisconsin in the Milwaukee area, and I ultimately found my way to New York after graduating from school, and happened to arrive in the Syracuse area, where I had the great fortune of meeting Shinge Roshi and the Hoenji Sangha there. But in having come here and trained, after my time as a resident here, I ended up returning to Wisconsin. And it's been interesting. Both wonderful, honestly. It's really been wonderful. And at the same time, you'll have to excuse me, but it's been a real mindfuck. And I think it particularly came forth, I found myself there, and for years, for whatever reason, I wanted to get involved in woodworking. And I found a listing for a job in cabinet making. So I applied to this job and received it. And this place of business was like a mile and a half from where I went to high school. So there's literally this way in which I'm driving to where I go to work, and instead of turning right to go to where I went to high school, I'm turning left. And it was a very interesting experience. There's a way in which, there's all those things that, unbeknownst to you, that to some extent you've been holding on to them. And I've spoken about this at a prior time, but there's another way in which in a sense, they've been taken care of for you. They're there to be presented when you return. I think that's one of the things with family. There's a certain way of without the life experience, intentionality, and efforts to really grow up and learn about the confusions of our youth, that those things have a way of just representing themselves. There's plenty of people, they seem to live almost as a different being when they're not with their family. In some ways I feel that way at times. There's a way in which I just find myself feeling embarrassed, you think you're a monk, okay. I'd like to think I do a little better than that. But that comes back to this thing of shed all the artifices, the notion of what it means. Yes, of course, we don't want to do those things, but you don't have to be a monk, a nun, be ordained to not want to do those things. It doesn't make you special. It does make you really question what you're doing, though. Yeah, and in being back, there's that way in which I come here and this is home. This is home. It's not just simply from that time of practicing here as a resident. There's that way in which I feel called home simply by being here. There was that wonderful thing of coming into the Zendo the first night and sitting down, and we had not yet all arrived yet, but I had the luxury of sitting there with those who had reached their seats, and through the presence of this, I don't know what I can call it, this dharmic energy, this place in this Zendo with all of you, and seated at that moment right next to Hokuto Osho, and just this wonderful warmth, such gratitude and love just came forth. And I knew that I arrived. Simply in sitting down. And yet, we can't turn our back on the realities of our karma either. There's that way I also feel called to be in Wisconsin this time, to tend to the unattended, to be with my parents, to support them. My parents are certainly getting older. It's one of those things just in the years of being back there, seeing those various signs of the aging process. And one of the often distinct ones is a person's gait when walking. There tends to get a little bit of that shuffle in there. And seeing that, and having my parents be aware of it too, even remarking at times. There's just those ways of, without their involvement, it just seems to happen. Suddenly they don't walk as readily. Certainly they can get around just fine. They're both in good health, which I feel very fortunate to have that with them. But to really see that aging, it certainly is something I've been conscious of throughout my own life. And yet it can be something that's easy to lose sight of through all those obstructions, all that confusion, all the pain. In this lifetime, how would I say, I have been dead, I guess you could say. From a vantage, it makes no sense, but when I was 7 years old, I was hit by a car. It actually happened right in front of my parents' house. And even now in some ways, I'm very timid and shy. I was not a daredevil or anything like that. And it seems, as best they can piece together, I was sledding with one of my friends, but as you may understand, he wasn't necessarily able to verbalize what had just transpired. He was like 6 years old. So it seems that I fell into my sled. It was very icy covered snow, and went out in the road. And along came a vehicle. It was actually looking for the house of my friend who lived down the street. Unfortunately, he had passed it. But in looking for a house, he kind of noticed a sled came out in the road. And I went under it. I guess it was a Jeep. And as I've been told, essentially the rack and pinion steering hit me right above my left eye. If you've seen the scar here, it's from that. And about 2 weeks after this event, this gentleman called my parents and basically confessed that his first thought was like, stupid kids, like thinking that a kid sent out a sled in the road, until he had the thought of, but what if there was a kid in the sled? And he estimated that he dragged me around about 75 feet. So fortunately, still at that time, there was 911. And beyond that, there was the great fortune that literally across the street, right in front, there was a volunteer firefighter who lived across the street. So when it went on the radio that there was this event that needed to be seen to, he literally could come out and revive me before the ambulance ever arrived. So they took me off to Children's Hospital in the Milwaukee area. I actually got to be a patient of the hospital on like the second day it was open. So at least for guests and stuff, like there were bathrooms where they didn't even have the toilet paper all filled or anything like that. So here we have my parents who get to be there, and the understanding doctors and nurses who facilitated. So I went through the surgery, and they lost count apparently somewhere in the 80s of the number of stitches that they used. But then I found myself waking up in the hospital. And it's quite an experience. Have absolutely no reference of where you are, how you got there, what transpired. I'm trying to think of the term for it. Maybe I'll even turn to Hokuto Osho. There's that point where your muscles basically, you can't move, like your legs in particular, when you wake up from these kinds of events. And it's called...
If it's psychological, it's catatonia. If it's physical, paralysis.
In a sense, it was paralysis, but I definitely couldn't move, my legs anyway. So they came back on board, but it was a clear slate. There's really nothing I could have fixed. But partly what makes me think of it is in relation to my parents. Of course, they almost lost their son. My sister almost lost her brother. And I was almost in a position of having to pass on to the next lifetime before I had ever had the opportunity to encounter this Dharma. So it was actually only like 3 days after this happened that I actually was able to return home. Mind you, essentially my parents, particularly my mother, had to serve as the nurse. There was various things that she had to do that I'll leave to the nurses to speculate what you have to see to at that time. But yeah, I was able to go home. And of course my parents were, very doting, particularly my mother. And she was making sure that I had all the various things, that I was comfortable, that I was able to be entertained, could play games and do various things. And I present this not as an embarrassment to her, but in part as a great appreciation of her love, that she was doing all these things simply through that love. But in all of her effort, at some point I turned to her and I said, "Mama, shouldn't you get friends your own age?" And that was that a great smack of reality that often children can provide. To know that in some ways, despite that recent trauma, and ultimately a physical trauma, that I was okay. I was okay. And I also found myself reflecting in terms of my father, and like, in some ways he's just kind of a goofy guy. He's kind of a funny guy. There's certainly ways in which I take after him, but I find myself thinking just particularly of him in my youth and like with kids, and he's somebody like he'll just like make up little songs and he'll sing, little things to his kids. Like I can't even think of what some of them are at the moment, but like he does the same with like the dogs. And yeah, I just find like it's just the feeling is so wonderful, like just that playfulness and engagement. And in part I was thinking about it, and I'm sure it's no coincidence that the following summer, one of the things he'd been doing since his childhood and was a passion of his is golf. And that following summer, suddenly he wanted to be able to include me in on it. And it was something that we still do somewhat, not nearly as often as I like to say. In part, we haven't actually been on a course together in a few years. And some of that's unfortunately my own doing, is saying just that way in which finding myself caught up in various things. These things that hinder me from, it's not we have to go all the time, but simply engaging in something that is a way that we just simply get to share time together. And it doesn't have to be anything extraordinary in that sense of, a wonderfully in-depth conversation. It would certainly be nice to, in some ways, have more opportunity for those. But as I was saying before, like there's nothing in some ways more powerful than that power of presence, to really be with someone, regardless of the conditions of it. And to simply just share something together. So I'd just like to close in looking at one last thing from the unborn. Bankei to his disciples. When I was 26 and had my realization of the fundamental truth of the unborn in that small hut in Harima, I went to Dosha, and he confirmed it for me. Now, in point of its fundamental truth, there's not the slightest bit of difference between the understanding I had then and my understanding now. Yet with the perfection and clarity of my Dharma eye, I now have a total freedom that is fully conversant with the great Dharma. There is a difference of heaven and earth between the way I was then, when I was with Dosha, and the way I am now. None of you here should doubt that the same thing will happen to you. You can be sure that the day will come when your Dharma eye will come to full perfection too. Someone asked, does it happen at a certain point all at once? No, there is no certain time. When the eye of the way becomes clear and bright, without a single imperfection of any kind, then it is perfect and complete. It comes as a result of cultivating it with total, unswerving devotion. So when these genuine feelings of gratitude, of love, of joy come forth. These are great opportunities to renew our vow. Just so, when we encounter the difficulties, the pain, the discomforts, the fears, the insecurities, these too are our opportunity to renew our vow. So, with great gratitude, let us do this together.